Today we have the honor of interviewing Richard Griffiths, a psychology researcher and founder of the 2Q Institute for Education and Training in Secular Spirituality. With an impressive background as the former national chairman of the transpersonal psychology section of the Australian Psychological Society, Richard has dedicated decades to developing the innovative 3Q portal method, which integrates insight spiritual wisdom with modern science. We look forward to exploring how his approach to combining intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence can transform lives in organizations around the world, and now here in Brazil. Thank you, Richard. Thank you a lot for accepting our invitation.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I always enjoy sharing 3Q whenever I get the opportunity.
Thank you. Richard is my teacher, and I'm very honored and grateful to be here with you now, Richard.
Well, I'm excited that you're going to share this with people in Brazil, which has never happened before.
Yeah, it's a new thing for us, and I'm so excited too. So, Richard, could you tell us about your personal journey that led to development of the 3Q portal method? What inspired you to focus on spiritual intelligence?
Well, in the earlier part of my life, I was brought up as a Catholic. But in my late teens, I found I couldn't accept some of the Catholic teachings. So I left the Catholic faith, and I was left with the only apparent alternative at the time, which was scientific materialism. You know, the belief that the world is just an accidental product of physical forces. There's no inherent meaning and purpose in life, and that when you're dead, you're dead. You know, that belief, which is the mainstream belief of many people today. And so I was left thinking that. I went to university, studied psychology, but was very dissatisfied with this belief in scientific materialism, because it made life feel purposeless. Why bother struggling on if there's no meaning and purpose, and you're dead when you're dead? Why not just die now, you know?
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Yeah.
And I remember one incident. I was going home from work, and I was stood on the side of the road waiting to cross the road. And I looked down, and I saw the pavement I was standing on had been worn flat by millions of people who had stood on that spot before me. And it was a stone curbing at the side of the road, worn flat right down to the surface of the road. And I thought, my God, millions of feet have walked on that in order to wear it down to that point. And I thought, all these people are now dead. And everyone who ever knew them is dead. And forgotten. No one who knew them is still alive. And I thought, what was the point of their life? They came, they lived, they suffered, they died, and are now forgotten forever. And I thought with horror, and I am one of them. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
And I felt this overwhelming sense of horror and desperation. Thinking, what is the point of this charade? At that point, I realized I had to find if there was a meaning and purpose to existence. I had to find it.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't, well, why bother with anything? If there was, well, that would change everything. So, at that point, I had finished my studies in psychology, and I went to study transpersonal psychology, which, as you know, is all about higher states of consciousness. And through studying transpersonal psychology, I learned about meditation. So I began to seek a teacher of meditation. But one in particular I found was living in India at the time, and I went to see him. And I learned this particular meditation method. And through meditation, I experienced higher states of consciousness, states of joy and bliss beyond the thinking mind. And I became convinced that reality was not reducible to the material level of existence, that reality was greater than the material level of existence. And I decided I needed to find a way of communicating this truth to other people, particularly to people who believe, as I used to believe, that life is meaningless, life is just physical, there's nothing beyond this physical material world, and when you're dead, you're dead. I felt I had a mission to help these people understand that there is something beyond the material world that they can experience, and that they can be relieved of their hopelessness and their sense of desperation. So that became my mission. But I knew that I had to find a new language, because I couldn't go to secular people and say, go to India, find this guru, find this guru and learn meditation from this guru. I thought, no, I can't do that. They'll just think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I have to find a language that secular people can relate to, which will give them access to the same experience I was having of the spiritual dimension of existence. And that began my search for the right language. And eventually, I decided the way to express it was in terms of spiritual intelligence, because it had to be a language that secular people could relate to and that scientific people could relate to, but which would also lead them to an experience of what was beyond the mind, what was beyond the thinking mind. And so that was the beginning of my work on spiritual intelligence, which began 20 years ago now.
Perfect, Richard. And I'm certain that you achieved it. You got it. You made you did a simple way to get it and to achieve these states of consciousness.
Right. And also not only a way to experience it, but a way to explain it to the rational, logical mind. And so my work is all about explaining in rational, logical terms how spirituality relates to our normal experience.
Perfect. The TQ methodology combines three types of intelligence: intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence. Could you explain why integrating all three is more powerful than developing them separately?
Yes, well, these three dimensions of intelligence, as you know, relate to, well, there's IQ, intellectual intelligence. That's the rational, logical thinking that we all use. It's basically the language a computer works in, intellectual intelligence. And then there's EQ, emotional intelligence, which is all about how do you connect to other people, recognizing their emotions and your emotions, and being able to relate to people on an emotional level, not just a rational IQ level. So those two levels are important, IQ and EQ, but they lack something. They lack the level of spiritual intelligence, SQ, which is all about finding meaning and purpose, which comes from our true self beyond the thinking mind. And I found it was important to develop all three dimensions together, IQ, EQ, and SQ, because any one of them on their own is not sufficient. We need to have all three levels working together. And then you have intellect, emotion, and spirit all combined and integrated.
Perfect. Many people associate spiritual practice with religion. How is the 3Q portal method different, and what does secular spirituality really mean?
Yes. Well, of course, religion is based on believing things. You know, you believe in God, or you believe in the Holy Spirit, or you believe in Jesus, or you believe in Muhammad, right? Whereas secular spirituality, which is what I teach, has no beliefs. Secular spirituality is spirituality without religion, without beliefs, without dogma. It's the essence of spirituality without all the added complications that religion adds to spirituality. And, you know, as it turns out, we don't need to believe anything. We can experience spirituality without any beliefs at all. So that's secular spirituality.
What scientific evidence supports the 3Q methodology, especially regarding neuroplasticity and brain development?
Yes. Well, neuroplasticity, as you know, and as many people know, refers to the fact that our brains continue to develop. And they used to think that after the age of 10 that your brain stops developing. It's not true. Scientists have discovered that your brain continues to develop according to how you use it. So, for example, a taxi driver who spends all day finding directions, they've inspected the brain of taxi drivers, and they found that their brains have an enlarged area which is devoted to finding directions. So because they use their brain in that way, the part of the brain that is engaged in finding directions has grown in taxi drivers. This is called neuroplasticity. Plasticity meaning it's plastic. The brain is plastic. The brain develops according to how you use it. Now, the relevance of neuroplasticity to spiritual intelligence is this. If you habitually activate your spiritual intelligence, you will develop those parts of the brain more fully that give you access to the spiritual dimension of reality beyond the thinking mind. And so neuroplasticity means that the more spiritual intelligence you experience, the easier it becomes to experience spiritual intelligence, because you've developed the brain to be able to do that. And another relevant factor that you asked about was brain structure. Scientists have discovered that when you hold a state of awareness for more than 15 seconds, it goes from short-term memory to long-term memory. Now, when something goes from short-term memory to long-term memory, it builds structure in the brain that wasn't there before. In other words, building a long-term memory means building a new brain structure beyond the short-term memory capability. So in other words, the more you experience spiritual intelligence, the more your brain structure is built in such a way that spiritual intelligence is encoded in your brain without you having even to think about it. It becomes part of your natural capability.
Yeah, perfect. Many Brazilians struggle with anxiety, burnout, and feeling disconnected from their purpose. How specifically might Tricky help with these widespread challenges?
Well, as you know yourself, Eleni, spiritual intelligence gives you access to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose and enables you to feel the joy of simply being. So these qualities of spiritual intelligence neutralize the feeling of purposelessness and the feeling of anxiety and depression. When you can access spiritual intelligence, you feel an inherent purpose to existence, and you feel beyond anxiety, you feel beyond depression, you feel the truth of your true self, which is free of negativity. Your true self feels always happy, regardless of what's going on. So spiritual intelligence is a very useful capability for those who tend to have an anxious or depressed personality.
Yeah, and how does the 2Q portal differ from mindfulness and traditional meditation practice that many people are already familiar with?
Well, traditional meditation practices require particular conditions, like you have to sit down, close your eyes, be in a quiet space, and you have to sit there for 20 minutes or half an hour in order to do a traditional form of meditation. The 3Q can be done in 30 seconds, and you can do it in association with any activities and doesn't require a particular setting. To activate 3Q or spiritual intelligence doesn't require you to sit in a quiet place with your eyes closed. You can do the 3Q method while walking down the street, while driving, while talking to someone. So it's very portable, unlike traditional methods of meditation. 3Q is portable, can be taken with you anywhere, and you can do it anywhere. Now that's very important because it means that 3Q can be applied directly in association with any activity. Unlike traditional forms of meditation that you have to do while you stop any other form of activity, you go and do a traditional form of meditation, and then you come back to your life after that. But then you could just forget all about the traditional meditation, whereas 3Q you experience while actively involved in life. And so you bring the power of spirituality into direct connection with whatever is happening in your life at that moment. So the power of the spirit is brought down to meet the exact conditions of the present moment, unlike traditional forms of meditation. Now, mindfulness, as you know, is a Buddhist practice. And when this practice is taught in the West, it's usually taught as a separate, standalone method. And the method they teach is just observe whatever you're experiencing without judgment. That's it.
Yeah.
Observe whatever you're experiencing without judgment. Now, it does help. It helps you to focus. It helps you to be free of anxiety, free of stress, and it helps you to have a calm approach to whatever you're doing. However, the problem with mindfulness, when it's taught as a standalone discipline, as it's taught in the West, is that there's no ethical component. I mean, you could rob a bank mindfully, give me your money. I'm doing it mindfully. I'm very calm. I'm very focused. I don't have any stress, but give me your money, you know?
Yeah.
So mindfulness, as it's taught in the West, has no ethical component. Unlike spiritual intelligence, which is inherently ethical, inherently moral, because you're feeling love and peace, and you can't do the wrong thing when you're feeling love and peace. Now, in the traditional setting, when Buddha first taught mindfulness in India, Buddha taught mindfulness as part of the Eightfold Path. And the other elements of the Eightfold Path were right life, you know, right focus, right discipline, right living. So Buddha taught ethics in addition to mindfulness. And so when mindfulness was used in its original context in India, as taught by Buddha, it was ethical because he taught ethical principles. But when mindfulness is taught in the West, it's taught without any ethical principles. So you could launch a training program, mindfulness for bank robbers, you know? Bank robbers, learn mindfulness so that when you rob the next bank, you can do it without stress, you know?
Perfect. Do you know, Richard, I remember you recently because I'm watching a Netflix series that is called, I think it's Murder Mindfully. And it's about a man who becomes a murderer after he did a mindfulness course. When he's killing, he's mindfully.
Right, killing mindfully.
Yeah.
So mindfulness, as it's taught in the West, does not have those ethical, moral principles that spiritual intelligence has.
Perfect. And you described 3Q as working with the twin poles of attention, the ego and the soul. Could you explain this human operation system in simple terms for us, please?
Yes. Well, attention has two poles. There's what you're aware of, that's called the object pole, and there's awareness itself, which is called the subject pole. So they're opposite poles of attention. Now, the object pole, which is what you're aware of, is the location of everything you're aware of: thoughts, emotions, memories, hopes, dreams, fears, self-image. Everything you're aware of is at the object pole. And at the subject pole is consciousness itself, which is what you are. You are consciousness itself, and this is called the soul, the true self. Now, consciousness is always already happy. Your true self, your soul, is always already happy. Doesn't have to learn to be happy, is already happy, regardless of what's going on at the object pole. But if you identify with the object pole, thoughts, emotions, memories, beliefs, hopes, fears, anxieties, if you identify with all that, a lot of the time you won't be happy. So these are two distinct poles: object pole of attention, subject pole of attention. And spiritual intelligence is about going from the object pole to the subject pole. And there's a very simple method I teach to do that.
Perfect. Could you share some of the most remarkable transformations you've witnessed in people after they've learned and applied the 3Q method?
Yes, well, I think some of the most remarkable changes can be found in people who are dealing with trauma. People, you know, who've had a terrible experience, often in their childhood, and they get these repeated experiences of the trauma, causing anxiety, depression, fear, and so on. But if they learn 3Q, they discover they can overcome the effects of trauma without having to continually repeat the traumatic experiences that tend to happen for people who've had trauma in the past. And so I also work as a therapist, as a psychologist. And so I teach my clients 3Q, and those who've had a traumatic experience and who are still suffering the trauma after effects find that 3Q is very beneficial because it relieves them of having to re-experience the trauma every day.
Perfect. It's so necessary. And how quickly can someone start to experience benefits? And what changes might they notice first?
You can learn to do 3Q in 5 minutes. And so you can get the benefits of 3Q in 5 minutes. And once you've learned how to do it, you can keep getting the benefits by repeating the method of activating spiritual intelligence. So it's very quick. Doesn't take a long time. Of course, it takes a bit longer for spiritual intelligence to become part of you because the brain has to gradually change through neuroplasticity. But you can activate spiritual intelligence very quickly in a matter of minutes.
Okay. For business leaders and professionals in Brazil, how can 3Q improve their leadership capabilities and organizational culture?
Well, one of the qualities of spiritual intelligence is compassion and the ability to listen. Now, we all take for granted the ability to listen. We all say, well, sure, I can listen. But how often do you find that you're listening to someone in order to make a reply instead of fully listening to them without trying to think of your reply, just fully taking in what they're saying and feeling the truth of what they're saying? So when you use your spiritual intelligence, you're able to put aside this impulse to develop your own reply, and you're able to fully be present and fully take in what that person is saying. Now, this is a very important leadership skill because people need to feel understood. They need to feel that their leaders are fully comprehending what they feel. But if their leaders are not able to listen properly, if their leaders are all the time trying to think of how to reply without fully listening to what their employees are saying, their employees will feel unappreciated, not understood. They'll feel that their concerns are being swept aside without being given proper importance. So listening is a very important leadership skill, and particularly listening with compassion. Listening with a sense of, well, that could be me, you know? In other words, I have compassion for this person because I know that whatever they might be going through, I could be going through it too. And so I want to listen with empathy and compassion to what they're saying. Now, these are very important leadership skills that if a leader lacks them, the people that they are leading can feel that their concerns are not being given proper consideration. And they will tend to feel that their leaders don't care about them, which is a very bad result for any organization.
Yeah. And you've described 3Q as representing the next stage in the evolution of collective consciousness. Could you elaborate on this vision for the future?
Yes. Well, collective consciousness means the general understanding of most people in a particular culture. Now, in Western cultures and Westernized cultures, we have two main groups of people: religious people who believe in a religion, and non-religious people, secular people. Now, in the West, religious people used to be in the majority.
Yeah.
But these days, they're a minority. These days, in the West and in Westernized cultures, secular people are in the majority. So the collective consciousness of Western societies and Westernized societies, the collective consciousness is entirely secular, which basically means a belief in materialism, you know, that the world is just an accidental result of physical forces, and that there's no inherent meaning and purpose, and when you're dead, you're dead. That's the collective consciousness of Westernized cultures at the present time. But what 3Q can do is to elevate this collective consciousness, because if enough people learn how to experience the spiritual dimension of reality, then the collective consciousness will rise beyond that materialistic idea, and also beyond the collective consciousness of religion, because religion is a belief system. It's what your mind believes. But spirituality goes beyond what your mind believes. It gives you access to what your true self knows, what your true self knows to be the truth, not just what your mind believes. So spirituality will raise the collective consciousness, not only in secular societies, but also in religious societies, because it'll give people access to the truth of reality beyond the thinking mind.
I think it's important to ask you about religion, because in Brazil we are a very religious country, and is religion a problem or a difficult to achieve spiritual intelligence? And if I'm a religious person, do I need to give up of religions to learn 3Q?
No, you don't need to give up your religion to learn 3Q, because everyone can learn to activate their spiritual intelligence, whether or not they have religious beliefs. So spiritual intelligence is an inherent capability that everyone has, whether they're religious or not. And you can keep your religious beliefs if you wish, there's no problem. And you can still use your spiritual intelligence. In fact, spiritual intelligence will help to make your religious beliefs more real, more deeply felt, because by using spiritual intelligence, you connect to the truth of the heart, not just to the truth of your brain. Your brain can believe in religious ideas, but it's when your heart feels the truth that religion points to. And so that's the true power. And so spiritual intelligence can help to enhance your religious practice by giving you access to the truth beyond the thinking mind.
Perfect. I have a last question for you. For Brazilians who are interested in experience the 3Q portal, what would be your advice on how to approach this journey of self-discovery and transformation?
Well, there's two main things. One is you can go to my website, sqi.co, and you'll find a video there which gives you an exact description of how to activate spiritual intelligence. But if you're from Brazil and maybe your English isn't that good, the best way would be to go to a presentation by a Brazilian 3Q practitioner like you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Eleni is trained as a 3Q practitioner, and she will be offering presentations on 3Q in Portuguese. So if your English isn't that good and you want to hear a Portuguese version of spiritual intelligence and how to experience it, I recommend you go to a presentation by Eleni, either in person or online.
Perfect, Richard. Thank you very much. It's very nice to hear you and to learn with you. I'm so grateful and so honored. And I really expect that I can divide with Brazilians all of your decades of study and education. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me, Eleni. I've really enjoyed sharing spiritual intelligence with your listeners. I know you're going to translate this into Portuguese so that they'll be able to understand better, or those whose English isn't that good. So I hope many Brazilians get to learn about spiritual intelligence through your translated podcast.